Hello, and thank you for listening to my new YouTube clip on how to secure that government job. Now, in this economy, with things being as tough as they are, the ultimate luxury is having a job. In Australia and most of the Western world, the public service has cottoned on to this, and they've gone through a process to make it harder for people to get into the public service. And this is an interesting way they've done it. What they've done is they've introduced something called a selection criteria. Now, a selection criteria basically is where they ask you a whole lot of questions relating to the job you're applying for, and they basically they ask you to answer them. And what happens is most people find the selection criteria so frustrating and annoying in applying for, they dip out of the employment process. And it's quite interesting there that selection criteria is being used because most of the jobs you apply for, if they took a look at your resume, they could very easily decide, look, this person's suitable, or no, this person's not suitable, but they need to do it in official bureaucratic way. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple rules for applying for government jobs. Number 1 rule is to ring up and find out, is somebody presently acting in the role? Now, this is probably the most important point, because if you are going to apply for a government role, the selection criteria can take you a day or two of your time to complete. So, if you're not careful, you could waste your time. I always think the best thing to do is to ring up and say, hey, is somebody acting in the role? And then you'll get a yes or a no. And that's very important, because if somebody's already acting in the role and they're going to apply for that position, you're coming in as the outsider, because what better experience could you get than actually presently being in that role that they're advertising? So you'd best to be inclined to say, if somebody is acting in the role, are they going to apply for the job? And how do I stand a chance of getting it? Just be honest and throw that at them. Now, in the public service themselves they're quite dishonest, and that they have absolutely no regard for your time. So you'll probably hear some crap like, oh no, please apply, we encourage you to, we encourage all people to apply, and we'll make assessments. This is really a load of bullshit. The public service itself, the quality of work that they produce is quite shithouse, really. So don't ever be intimidated by these losers. So if someone is acting in the role, that doesn't mean that you should discard the role and not apply for it. It just means you've got to realize that, hey, you've got less of a chance of getting it. Tip number 2 is, when you answer the selection criteria, how much stuff do you put in there? Well, I've made the mistake in the past of putting a paragraph or a couple lines. This is a big no-no. You really need to be having about half an A4 page to a full A4 page per selection criteria question. So if you don't have a long enough answer, your application will be binned. So there's no point wasting your time with a very small application. You've really got to put this crap together. So as I say, half a page to a full page. I recommend using bullet points and to summarize your experience. Often when you apply for government roles, they'll ask you the same question over and over again. I went for an IT role, and they said, oh, what Windows network environment experience have you got? The next question was, what experience do you have in a networked environment? And it really was quite laborious. And they basically were asking the same question over and over again, and I took a different stance. I thought, okay, I'll answer it one way for one question, I'll answer it a different way for the next question, and I secured an interview. Um, and it's quite an interesting process how they do this sort of stuff there. Tip number 3: keywords. Keywords are very important. Find out what the keywords are for each selection criteria you are completing. Now, I've actually been the other side of the selection criteria process. I've actually been and I've seen how people assess people who have applied for roles. And if you saw the shit and the crap that they actually did to mark the good from the bad, you would be fucking appalled. Basically, in things that I've seen them where they give you a tick every time you mention a keyword or a phrase they like. They'll give you a tick, and they will count up the number of ticks, and that gives you the score. So the thing you've got to do there is you've got to find out what the keywords are for that question and use that keyword over and over again, because the stupid government bureaucrats, they're lazy fuckers, and they will basically just count the number of ticks. And to be honest with you, I think this is the most shithouse way to assess someone's application. I mean, if you mention the same word over and over again, I mean, how does that make you good for the job? It's just absolute crap. But when you're applying for the job, you've got to do what they want. So use keywords and use them over and over again. Did I mention to use keywords? Use them over and over again. And don't forget to use the keywords over and over again. The 4th tip is to ring and ask questions. Now, the reason I suggest you do this is firstly, you want to find out is somebody acting in the role. But you also want to work out what the keywords you should be using. So if you're applying for a role, you say, look, I've looked at the selection criteria. I'm just wondering what sort of characteristics you're looking for, selection criteria 1. What sort of experience, and you can even be as blatant and say, what keywords are you using? So that's how it goes with the public service. Tip number 5. Expect to wait an unrealistically long time, whether you're successful or unsuccessful. Now, you've got to remember, this is the government. They have no commercial pressure on them whatsoever. They couldn't find a tart in a brothel with a handful of 50s at times. And what you've got to understand is, you'll apply for something. They're in no hurry. You might have mortgage payments due, the school fees are due, rego on the car's due, but they honestly don't give a flying fuck. All they are concerned about is their toil, that's time in lieu, or their sick days, or their long lunches, or their morning teas. And so expect to wait a long time. For example, well, after you have applied for the role, you may have to wait up to 4 to 6 weeks for an indication of whether you're successful or you've obtained an interview. Then comes the interview, and it's probably another month to 2 months before you know whether you're successful or not. If you are successful, then there's a period of time before you'll start. So it's quite easily from applying for a role to actually getting the role. This is assuming you're lucky enough with your selection criteria and you've followed all the tips I've mentioned there. You do actually get the job. You could actually be waiting 6 months. Now, obviously, you've got to factor that in. If you're urgently needing money to pay the rent next week, applying for government jobs may not be the best use of your time. So there you have it. That's the tips for the applying for selection criteria. And I wish you well. The thing to remember is the hardest thing in the government is actually getting yourself in there. Once you're in there, of course, then the fun begins, because you don't actually have to do terribly much work. You can, you have time for your hobbies. You could start a small business on the side. There's a number of things that happens there. The government's a really weird place. For example, I remember the government is very up on the fact that they don't want to be seen wasting resources. So they will not provide coffee or tea. You've got to bring your own milk, sugar and coffee or tea in. But they will have staff who do fuck all day, and that doesn't seem to bother. but they won't provide a couple of tea bags or some sugar or some milk. So you've got to get clicky with how the government works, and there's no point to get upset about it. You've just got to get your ass in there, and then you can pursue your hobbies. You can pursue a business. You've got a lot of leave and time and interesting things like toil and stuff like that there, which takes the edge off a boring role. As one public servant said to me, at 4 o'clock, he's never seen so many walking corpses. He said basically when they're at the job, they're dead, and when the only way they revive is when it's 4 o'clock knocking off time. I hope these tips have been useful. I hope you apply for some roles, and always be positive. Always be inclusive. That's a great word to use. They'll always throw in one final point there. They'll always throw in a HS&E or a workplace discrimination, or it doesn't matter if you're in the Ku Klux Klan or what the story is, but always be extremely liberal, always be completely understanding and compassionate, and present that sort of bullshit persona. It doesn't matter what the truth is. This is not an interview to tell them your opinions on things. This is an interview to get your ass inside doing nothing for reasonable money. So I wish you all luck, and if you do get the job, please, and if you found this YouTube video to be helpful, please write back to me, and I'd love to hear how it went. Thanks very much.